Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rocky Mountain Sports Network. Today, I'm talking about the Calgary Flames. So, we're going to go into deep dive on what went wrong in their season, what do they need to do going forward, and how can they kind of propel themselves back into the playoffs after a really weird season. So, going into it first, obviously they've had a historically weird season 17 overtime and shootout losses, 30 losses in one goal deficits, with a 37, 27, and 17 record, which might be updated because I'm recording this before the San Jose Sharks game tonight. So that may be 38, might be 28, might be 18, depending on how it goes. But before we get into what happened this season and what they could do to change, let's talk about what they did past off season. So obviously they made that big trade, Chucky for Huberdeau, Uyghur, Cole Schwindt, and a first-round pick. And that trade, obviously, when it first happened, I was very excited for. I thought it was going to be a great trade for both sides. Obviously, Chucky is one of the best players in the league. 107 points this season. Has been absolutely fantastic for the Florida Panthers as they slowly try to make their way to the playoffs. Game 81, they need to win to get in. So that's how that works. And for the Flames, I thought Huberdeau was a great player to replace Chucky with. And he was going to have an unbelievable season. Obviously, it didn't quite go his way, but I will go back to later and kind of talk about why that might be. Uyghur was a great defensive piece. I thought he bounced back very well in the second half of the season. Didn't have quite the first half of the season, so that might have made Flames fans kind of question him, but he kind of bounced back in the second half, really improved his offense, played very well on defense, and really overall played way better. Cole Schwindt is a good prospect, I think, for the Flames to get here. Very underrated, good size. He could really put the puck in the net if he needs to in the future. And finally, the first round pick is obviously very important for us. If the Florida Panthers, for some reason, have injuries or anything like that next year, this pick could potentially be ours. And that's something that can definitely propel us into the future. Obviously, it would have been better if it happened this year. It was this year's pick, and we got somebody of the caliber of Connor Bedard. But if we go into next year and they have a bad season, that's still a good quality prospect to have. So obviously, along with Chucky, Johnny Gaudreau also left the team. He went to Columbus, signed a big deal there. And honestly, for me, that wasn't that big of a deal at the time. Sure, it was going to hurt, and sure, I didn't know what was going to happen with the team going forward. Obviously, that resulting in Chucky requesting a trade and stuff like that. But at the time, I thought, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. He was kind of getting up there in age. He wanted more money, and he kind of lacked that size that somehow worked for that 1 year with Sutter. But as you can see this year, it's kind of lacked a little bit more as he went to Columbus, who is the worst team in the league. So why he chose Columbus, I have no idea. And what he saw, Laine was obviously hurt for a lot of the year. So that kind of made it hard for them. Then what we did was we traded Sean Monahan's large contract so that we could try and re-sign and get more money to sign people like Huberdeau and Uyghur. But I think the main result of this was bringing in a guy like Kadri. And a lot of people say that he also had a down year, but if you look at what he did last year, I don't blame the Flames for bringing somebody in like Kadri. He almost had 100 points last year. He played for a Colorado team that won the Stanley Cup. So you got to bring in more players that have that Stanley Cup pedigree and can come in and kind of lead the team and show them the way to kind of get going. So I thought Kadri was a great signing at the time. Obviously, it hasn't worked out quite well in the first year, but I think, again, I'll talk about later what we can do to kind of make it better for him. Trading Monahan, obviously, a lot of Flames fans loved Monahan. The issue with him was that he was getting injured a lot, and he wasn't really able to sustain good health. And when he was on the ice, he was playing on the fourth line because Daryl Sutter didn't like his play that much. He wasn't really battling for pucks as much. He was more of a guy that could hover in front of the net, get shots on goal, get it into the net off of rebounds, off of passes, whatever it might be from a player like Johnny Gaudreau in his prime. And that's how he kind of made himself instead of, going to the corner, going to the boards, and really showing his presence. He's a big guy. He's not a short person by any means. So I thought he'd be able to kind of improve his defensive game in that way, but he wasn't able to. Now he plays for Montreal Canadiens. And once again, he had a kind of a bad season with injuries. So we'll see what he's going to be able to do in free agency this year, and we'll go from there. Then we're going to talk about the trade deadline. We also brought in a player like Nick Ritchie and Troy Stetcher for a young prospect in Connor Mackey and Brett Ritchie. Obviously, it hurts to lose a player like Connor Mackey, but you bring in a person like Troy Stecher, who played unbelievable in his 2-week period with the Flames. He scored tons of goals, had a lot of assists. Wish I could tell you the number. I forgot to look that part up. And then we traded Dryden Hunt and Redeem Sohorna, which again, I mean, Dryden Hunt could turn into something, but he's also 27, 28 in the AHL right now. I don't see him in the future kind of coming up and playing for the Calgary Flames anytime soon. But that being said, I think the Flames should have done more in the trade deadline station in bringing in a top six forward that could have been able to, kind of gel with Huberdeau, gel with somebody like Kadri, scoring the puck wise. Like somebody who would have been great for the team would have been Timo Meier. He obviously went to the Devils in a huge trade with the San Jose Sharks. And that kind of, from there, it kind of brought the light in that we weren't going to bring in somebody good. Obviously, Nick Ritchie played pretty well in his role that he needed to do. He scored a couple goals. He was a big presence on that line with Huberdeau for a while there. But the thing is he wasn't going to be a top six forward going forward, We got players like Mangiapane, we got Toffoli, we got Huberdeau, obviously Kadri, Lindholm, Backlund can play wing. Like, we got all these players that can play wing. But unfortunately, they're not all top six type forwards that can really drive the team. We didn't have any game breakers really in our lineup. So it would have been nice to bring in somebody like a Timo Meier to be able to do that. And all this brings me back to Brad Treliving and what should we do with Brad Treliving? Because he did all this offseason and give us a chance to have a good team. Obviously, it didn't go his way. But I think all of this gave him the opportunity to get us a team that could win. And for that reason alone, I think we should bring back Treliving. Is it a 1-year deal? I don't know. Is it a 5-year? Who knows? But I think some capacity we should bring back Treliving, just because every single year he gives us an opportunity to win. He was put into a very bad situation with Johnny Gaudreau leaving and then Chucky leaving. And he kind of did whatever he could to bring in people and bring in pieces that could keep us in a winning mentality. And people said it was the summer of Treliving. So I think that was the best opportunity for him to bring people in. And he succeeded on a really high level. And now let's get to the part that will not be something that I will speak positively about, and that's Daryl Sutter. I think Daryl Sutter needs to be relieved of his duties. And I have 5 main reasons why that is. My first reason, and the most important reason to me, is not all shots are quality shots. We're second in the league with shots with 35.79% this year, with a 4% of all shots going in, 26% of them are blocked, and a .930 save percentage of all shots that were unblocked. And for me, that kind of shows that we were just kind of shooting to shoot. It's like in the past, I know that's worked for Daryl Sutter for the Kings team, but now we're in a league where the shots count more. Goalies are better. Goalies have bigger pads. Goalies are going to be better than they were 10 years ago. And that's just a reality. And we need to have players like Huberdeau, for example, who are going to pass it and make plays for an open shot. So many times I saw players like Mangiapane, and I'm not going to pick on him specifically, but he came into the zone and he would just shoot it. It wouldn't matter like if it would go in. Another stat is that 27% of our shots also miss the net. That's both unblocked and blocked. Like, we needed to be better on that portion of the game, in that not all shots are quality shots. Scored 260 goals this season is because we weren't able to get more quality shots, and goalies would go off on us because they would have great games in opposed to not having great games because our shots weren't quality shots, Our second reason is switching the lines / power play too much / not letting the young guys play. This is probably the most frustrating thing with Daryl Sutter to me, other than the shots, is that why were we changing the lines every single night, pretty much? Like, no player is going to be able to get comfortable in the line that they're in if they're constantly switching lines. Huberdeau, for example, this is his first year in a new environment that he's never played in. He's never played in Canada in his career, other than juniors and stuff. But he's never been in this kind of situation. He's trying to adjust to a new team, a new city, and you're constantly switching him from the first line to the third line to the second line. with different players every time. And that's not going to give him sustainable success because, well, what's he going to be doing is, if he's on a hot streak and then suddenly you move him again, and then, oh no, he's suddenly playing with players he's not comfortable with. I thought him and Peltier were great together. And the fact that it was a 5-6 game stretch where they were on fire together and they played really well, and then Sutter decided to go, Peltier deserves a first line chance. I understand that. But if you have two players that are gelling well together, those two players should play together, maybe on the top line. Maybe you bring both of those guys up to play with Lindholm for a chance. Obviously, Toffoli played amazing this year, and he was great. He deserves first line games, but you needed to have that kind of similarity throughout the season with your lines. And that's one of the reasons why the defense is always going to flourish, because you constantly had the same lines throughout. Weegar got comfortable because he was put on the top line with Rasmus Anderson. And that's the same thing with the power play, is that we constantly were switching people in and out of the power play. Obviously, if it wasn't working, then obviously you would switch it. But if you're switching it every night, like I said, you're not going to get that much success that way. In that players like Huberdeau, who need to be on the top power play unit, and that's one of the main things that makes him great, he's got to be on that top line to be able to make the passes and stuff like that he needs to make to get his points. He set the NHL record last year for assists in a season. So why wouldn't you make him like your top passing option? Obviously he was, but when he's buried on the third line, he can't do that the way he wants to. He's not playing with the same players. At the beginning, when we traded for him, he said, hey, Lindholm's going to get 50 with me. And he thought he was going to play with somebody like Lindholm all season, but instead he was playing with people like Backlund. No offense to Backlund, he's one of our better players. Like Backlund, players like Kadri, again, great player, but he needed to have players that were on an even playing, like more even minutes with him, that are going to succeed more with him in lineup on his line. And that takes me to my third point, is that we're not letting our skilled players be themselves and play more of a defensive style. I understand a defensive style. I think people like Barry Trotz did a fantastic job with a defensive style. However, I think the Calgary Flames are a more offensive team. We are built to be an offensive team. We have 9 lines of players that can easily get you 50 points a year if you let them do it. And I think, the idea of just shooting the puck a bunch of times and hopefully it goes in is not going to work. And switching the lines all the time is not going to help. And Huberdeau is a huge example of this, in that you're kind of taking away his ability to play make, which you're constantly telling him to shoot the puck. And he's just trying to do what he does, but he can't, because you're constantly telling him to shoot the puck instead of passing the puck. Obviously, there's a double-edged sword there, but Huberdeau is not a player who's in a rough hit. Like, he's not going to hit people. He's not going to constantly be playing defensive-mindedly, and he's going to want to be on offense. And that's just something that he needs to let him do. He let Goujo do it last year. He let Chucky do it last year, and that's why it worked so well, is that they were on sustained lines the whole year, and those 3 went off. So why not let Huberdeau do the same thing? And that's just something that irked me the whole year, is that you put him on the first line or the third line, and you didn't keep him on the first line where he belongs. You could have easily had a line of Toffoli, Lindholm, and Huberdeau. Toffoli on the right side, Huberdeau on the left side. And that's another thing. Why did you put Huberdeau on the right side? He's been a left winger this whole career. Why not keep him as a left winger on your team? Putting him on the right side, he even said himself he wasn't feeling comfortable on the right side. So why keep him there? I'm assuming he told you that he wants to play on the left side. So why not keep him on the left side? And that's another thing, is attitude towards players. Every single time he was able to make it, so it was not his fault. He would scapegoat everybody. He would make it so, I shouldn't have made that adjustment. It was what he should have said. But instead, he would be like, Dan Valero was crap today. Or he'd say, our offense was crap today. Huberdeau sucks. And like, his attitude towards his players, I understand being somebody who's hard on their players, like tough love, but him publicly doing it to the media every time instead of taking responsibility for some of the adjustments he should have made in a game. For example, switching the lines, like he needs to take responsibility for something like that. But instead, he just scapegoats his players instead. And that is another reason why I think he should be fired. And finally, the fifth and final reason, Dan Vladar. So Dan Vladar this season had a stretch in November where he was unbelievable. He was constantly winning games. He won like 6 in a row, I believe. And he was just playing so well late November, early December. And then what does he do? He goes back to struggling Markstrom, who struggled even more, said he sucked at hockey. Give him a break. Give him more sustained break. This was your chance to see what Dan Vladar was. He's a 25-year-old goalie. This is your chance to see who he is. And you took that and you didn't do anything with it. He was 14-11 this year if you include overtime losses. And a lot of the losses weren't his fault. It was just the team losing, like one of the 30 losses in, the situation. Like the 31 goal deficit losses is not on Vladar. He tried his best to help the team get there. And that was another thing with Markstrom playing 19 of the last 20 games is not acceptable. You got to have a player like Dan Vladar play in those games, especially the way he was playing during hot stretches. He showed that he can be hot when you need him to be. When Markstrom was crap, Dan Vladar was able to pick the team up and get wins, especially on the road, beating teams like the Red Wings and like teams like that allowed you to stay afloat. Like Dan Vladar is one of the main reasons. There's 14 wins is one of the main reasons we stayed afloat this season. And we let him go. And that takes me to the point where, is it time to trade Dan Vladar so that Dustin Wolf can come up? Because he hasn't showed you enough clearly to want him to be your starter. And why would you get rid of Markstrom at this point of his career? And who's going to take him, honestly? And Dustin Wolf is ready for the NHL. If Dustin Wolf is ready for the NHL right now, you got to get rid of either Dan Vladar or Markstrom. And Vladar hasn't showed you enough, even though he's almost 10 years younger. You got to be able to showcase both your goalies to kind of see what you got. But Daryl Sutter didn't do that all year. That also goes to the point where young players coming up. Is it time for more young players to come up to this team and continuously be better as a team, we need players like Coronado, Peltier, and Dewar to come into the lineup and kind of see what we have in them. We haven't done that the last couple of years with Daryl Sutter because he's so focused on veteran leadership and playing a tougher game that rookies can't come up right away and do that for you. So I believe it's time to let players like Trevor Lewis and Milan Lucic walk in free agency. I know people love Lucic, but it's time for him to go. So the players like Walker Dewar, who plays a very similar style to Lucic, so it wouldn't be that big of a jump, Peltier and Coronado can come into the lineup and show who they are and show who they can be in an offensive system, hopefully, if Daryl Sutter is fired, like I've hopefully been trying to do. And that also leads to the question, does a player like Nick Ritchie and Troy Stecher get another look? And I think Nick Ritchie was decent for the Flames, but I don't think he did enough to warrant a contract extension. Maybe a professional tryout is in his future, but I don't think he did enough to really show that he deserved a long, lengthy type of deal, Troy Stecher, on the other hand, I believe did enough to show that he could be somebody that could leapfrog somebody like Shillington to be in our lineup. Shillington could be a player that could be traded as well, in that we could have somebody like Troy Stecher come in and get a look. And I think he deserves a 2 or maybe 3-year deal with us, not that much money for him, and let him show who you are and trade Shillington to somebody who's willing to give up maybe a 2nd or a 3rd for him and see what we got with Stecher. That also leads to the last question, what should we do in free agency? And I think that is something that is kind of tough with this team because obviously we got a little bit of cap space with Lucic being off the books, but that also means that all these other deals for Huberdeau and Weegar are going to kick in. So I think what we need to do is, again, look for a top 6 option that's maybe cheaper. But the NHL doesn't have that big of a lineup right now for free agency. Obviously, Pasternak re-signed. A player like Timo Meier is going to be a restricted free agent. So obviously the Devils have everything they need to really re-sign him. And I think what we need to do is try to get something on the cheap, but I can't see us really having that. Maybe Richie is that solution. But if we weren't to do anything and just started to kind of do a little bit of a youth movement come up, that's what we did with Johnny Gaudreau. That's what we did with Sean Monahan. That's what we did with Mikael Backlund way back when, and it worked well. So I think that's what we need to do going forward. But let me know what you think down in the comments down below. Leave a like and subscribe, and look out for more content from the Rocky Mountain Sports Network. Thanks, and I will see you all later.